All right, let's get into it. Today we're talking about Abraham, the man known as the father of nations. But here's the thing. His story isn't some fairy tale about perfect, unshakable faith. No, it's a messy, deeply human journey filled with incredible promises, but also some really deep-seated fear and major stumbles. It all kicks off with this. Imagine just hearing this command out of the blue from God. Leave everything you know, your home, your family, your entire safety net, and head out to a place you've never even heard of. It's a huge, life-changing demand, and it's the spark that ignites his entire story.
Now, to really get how radical this was, you have to understand the world Abram was living in. It was a world that, for the most part, had completely forgotten about the one true God. He was from a place called Ur of the Chaldeans, which was just steeped in polytheism. Seriously, people were worshiping handmade idols, gods of stone and wood. So when the one invisible creator God speaks directly to Abram, it's a massive interruption in the status quo. And it's not just a command. It comes with this incredible three-part promise. God basically says, I'm not just asking you to wander around for no reason. I'm going to make you into a great nation. I'm going to make your name famous. And, this is the big one, I'm going to use you to bless the entire world. These three things are the bedrock of everything that comes next. So what does Abram do? He actually obeys. At 75 years old, he packs everything up and goes. But of course, his faith gets put to the test almost immediately, as the reality on the ground clashes with the promise he just heard. He shows up in Canaan, the promised land, and what does he find? A massive famine. The very land that was supposed to support a great nation can't even feed his family. So, feeling the pressure, he makes a run for Egypt. And this is where we see the first real crack in his face. Instead of trusting God to protect him, he gets totally overwhelmed by fear. He knows his wife, Sarai, is beautiful, and he's paranoid that the Egyptians will just kill him to get to her. So he cooks up this scheme and asks her to lie, to say she's his sister. It's a huge failure, choosing his own skin over faith in God's promise. Well, God steps in and protects him anyway, even with Abram's lie, and they eventually make it back to Canaan. But then, years start to crawl by. Then a decade. Abram and Sarai are just getting older and older, and that first part of the promise, a great nation, is looking more and more impossible. They still have no children. And this timeline, man, it really puts into perspective how hard this must have been. We're talking 25 years, a whole generation. You can see the key moments here, the promise, then that decade of waiting that leads them to take things into their own hands. It was a long, long time to hang on to a promise that seemed to be going nowhere. After 10 years of waiting, Sarai has had enough. She decides to, help God out. She figures maybe God meant for the promise to be fulfilled through someone else, so she gives her Egyptian maid, Hagar, to Abram. And from that, a son, Ishmael, is born. It's a totally human solution to a divine problem, and as you can imagine, it brings a whole lot of pain and conflict into the family. But God's not done. He shows up again and makes his promise official, turning it into a covenant. Think of it like a sacred, unbreakable contract. And he gives them new names. Abram, which meant exalted father, becomes Abraham, father of many nations. Sarai becomes Sarah, and he gives them a physical sign of this deal, circumcision, marking Abraham and his descendants as his chosen people. Okay, so you'd think after a personal, binding contract with God himself, Abraham's faith would be rock solid, right? Well, this is where his story is just so relatable and so human. Old fears die hard. Decades after that whole fiasco in Egypt, Abraham finds himself in a similar spot in a place called Gerar. And, you won't believe it, he pulls the exact same stunt. He tells King Abimelech that Sarah, who is now 90 years old and pregnant with the promised son, is his sister. It's like déjà vu in the worst possible way. It just goes to show that getting older doesn't automatically make you wiser. And the fallout is just dripping with irony. God has to step in again, warning the king in a dream. But then this pagan king, Abimelech, confronts Abraham and gives him this brutal dressing down. Think about that. The pagan king has the moral high ground, and he's calling out God's chosen prophet for his lies. So how does Abraham react? Does he apologize? Nope. He comes up with a list of lame excuses. First, he blames the people, saying, I just assumed you were all godless heathens. Then he tries to say it wasn't a total lie because she's his half-sister. And then he sort of subtly blames God for making him wander around in dangerous places to begin with.
He just refuses to own it.
But even after all of this, God stays faithful. The promise is finally about to come true, which brings us to the absolute climax of Abraham's life, a test so brutal it's almost impossible to imagine. And then, just like God said, the impossible happens. Abraham, at 100 years old, and Sarah, at 90, have a son. They name him Isaac, which means laughter. That 25-year wait is finally over. The promised heir is here. The joy must have been completely overwhelming. The promise was real. But then comes the ultimate question, a test that strikes at the very heart of the promise that God himself had just delivered. God issues this just devastating command. And listen to that language, your son, your only son, whom you love. God is asking Abraham to give up the very child that was the embodiment of every promise he had ever received. It's a test that seems to pit God's promise against God's own command.
But this time, Abraham obeys. No questions, no excuses. He travels for 3 days, he builds the altar, he binds his son. And just as he raises the knife, an angel calls out and stops him. His faith, his willingness to trust God more than the promise itself, has been proven. And at that exact moment, God provides a substitute, a ram caught in the bushes, showing that he is a God who provides.
So after this incredible, emotional roller coaster of a journey, with these dizzying highs of faith and some pretty shocking lows of failure, what is the legacy Abraham leaves us with?
Well, it's immense. He literally becomes the father of many nations, with kings among his descendants. He's called a friend of God, not because he was perfect, but because when it really mattered, he believed God. And his story, this idea of being made right with God through faith, became a foundational concept for Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. You know, in the end, Abraham's life teaches us that faith isn't about never having doubt or never being afraid. It's about who you decide to trust when you are afraid. His flawed, stumbling, but ultimately faithful journey leaves us with a really important question to think about. What does it truly mean to trust, especially when everything you care about is on the line?